What if I told you that to win a championship, you actually need to suffer just catastrophic, humiliating defeats on your own home turf?
I mean, it sounds totally counterintuitive, right? Like, that's not the script we're used to.
Exactly. Usually when we think about a championship sports season, we picture this clean, uninterrupted march to glory. You picture the team holding up the trophy, the confetti is falling, and in our memories, that team was just this unstoppable juggernaut from day one.
Right, the highlight reel effect.
Yeah, exactly, the highlight reel.
Yeah.
But today, we are totally tearing up the highlight reel. We are looking at the raw spreadsheet of a season to see how a title is actually built, like brick by statistical brick. Welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack a championship campaign strictly through the lens of raw data. We're looking at the statistical season log of Port Adelaide's Season 12 AFT Dice Premiership run.
And before we really get into the weeds with the numbers, we should probably clarify for you listening exactly what kind of data we're looking at here. Because the AFT Dice Premiership, well, it isn't flesh and blood athletes running around on a weekend.
Right. It's a bit different.
Yeah. It is a highly complex tabletop simulation of Australian rules football. It's a system governed entirely by, probability matrices, tactical modifiers, and literally dice rolls. So when we talk about a team winning or losing here, we are really talking about how effectively their statistical profile performed against a randomized mathematical environment.
Okay, let's unpack this because looking at this wall of numbers, it does not look like a smooth ride at all.
Not even close.
It tells a story of incredible statistical vulnerability, this crazy road warrior mentality, and then ultimate redemption. And actually, just a really quick primer for those of you who aren't steeped in Australian rules football, scoring, you score by kicking the ball through a set of posts, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So a goal, which goes through the middle post, is worth 6 points. And a behind, which misses slightly to the side, is worth 1 point. So we are going to be talking about some very, very high scores today.
Yeah, and that scoring system is crucial because it inherently creates this massive spectrum of numerical variance. Like when you strip away the emotion of a sports narrative and just look at the raw data, the scores, the venues, the quarter-by-quarter breakdowns, it reveals some highly surprising contradictions about how premierships are actually won.
Yeah.
The numbers show us that Port Adelaide's underlying profile was far from perfect. In fact, statistically, they were deeply flawed at times.
I'm looking at their home record at Adelaide Oval, and flawed feels like a massive understatement.
Oh, absolutely.
Usually, if you are going to win a title, your home stadium has to be this impenetrable fortress, right? Like a castle with a moat. You bank your home wins, and you mathematically try to steal a few on the road just to secure your playoff spot. But visiting teams were frequently arriving at Adelaide Oval and just completely dismantling Port Adelaide's system.
Yeah, they really were.
Like in round 1, they play the Adelaide Crows. No, technically the Crows are the home team on the spreadsheet, but it's played at the exact same venue. And Port loses that one 98-91.
Right, so a narrow statistical defeat to kick off the season, and in a probability-based simulation, a 7-point margin is essentially a coin flip that just didn't go their way.
A coin flip, yeah.
But the data gets so much more concerning as the season progresses.
It gets terrifying. Look at the middle of the season. Round 11, they lose to the Brisbane Lions by 22 points at Adelaide Oval.
Ouch.
And then the very next week, round 12, the Sydney Swans come to town. And Sydney puts up 126 points to Port's 80.
Wow.
That is a 46-point demolition on their home turf. And as if that wasn't enough, round 13, Fremantle arrives at Adelaide Oval and beats them 105-76. That's a 29-point margin.
It's a brutal stretch.
It really is. And if a team's defensive structure completely collapses at home 3 weeks in a row, doesn't that sort of suggest their core strategy relies on high-risk, high-reward ball movement? If you turn the ball over trying to play fast, a good statistical profile like Sydney's will just punish you mathematically.
What's fascinating here is the sheer variance in their performance at home, which directly supports your hypothesis about a high-risk strategy.
Right.
Because if you only isolated those specific games, the heavy losses, to Sydney, Fremantle, and Brisbane, you would assume this team's probability matrix was struggling just to make the playoffs, let alone win a championship. They were yielding massive scores.
But then you look at the other side of the ledger. They also had these massive, overpowering wins at home. They beat Richmond 131-100.
This is a huge score.
Huge.
Oh.
A 31-point win where they generated 19 goals and 17 behinds. They beat Melbourne by 31 points. They beat Essendon by 30 points. Port Adelaide's season data looks less like a steady blue chip stock and more like a volatile cryptocurrency.
That's a really good way to put it, yeah.
They have these massive boom cycles where they score over 130 points, but if the market shifts, or I guess in this case, if the opponent's tactical modifiers counter them, they experience these brutal 40-point crashes.
And that volatility is really the defining trait of their season. You know, a championship campaign isn't necessarily about minimizing variance to zero.
Really?
But yeah, it's often about generating enough capital to survive your own inevitable slumps.
The data here shows Port had an incredibly high offensive ceiling. When their tactical modifiers clicked, they could score heavily.
But when they didn't,
Exactly. When teams figured out how to break their lines, they completely collapsed defensively. I mean, giving up 126 points to Sydney at home is a glaring red flag. It shows their system had a very fragile floor.
which sort of begs the question, if their home form was this shaky, how were they considered true contenders?
Right.
Where did they actually build the statistical foundation for this premiership? Because it certainly wasn't in their own backyard. Well, the spreadsheet points us directly to the answer. They built their foundation by exploiting the probability matrices on the road, specifically down in Victoria.
Oh, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because you look at their games at Marvel Stadium, and it is just a completely different story.
It's night day.
Marvel Stadium was basically their second home. It's like a rock band that actually plays better on the road than in their hometown. Or like they were couch surfing and just decided to legally take ownership of the host's house.
It's true. The winning streak at Marvel is remarkable from a data perspective.
Yeah.
Let's look at the margins. They beat St. Kilda there by 17 points.
Okay.
They beat Carlton by 9. They took down North Melbourne by 16. And then their offensive algorithms just start accelerating.
Oh, they really do.
They beat the Western Bulldogs by 42 points, scoring 122 points in the process. And they beat Hawthorn by 36 points, putting up 119 points.
5 wins at Marvel Stadium. They basically own that venue.
Yeah.
But we have to talk about the absolute peak of this road warrior mentality. Round 17, down at GMHBA Stadium against the Geelong Cats.
Oh man, this game. This is the statistical outlier of the entire season across the league. But, you know, in the best possible way for Port Adelaide.
It's a literal mathematical bloodbath. Port Adelaide goes down to Geelong and scores 152 points.
Unbelievable.
152. They kicked 22 goals and 20 behinds. And for you listening, remember, a behind means a near miss or a rushed shot. So to have 22 goals and 20 behinds means they generated 42 distinct scoring shots.
Just an absurd volume of shots.
And Geelong scored 97 points, which is normally a highly respectable winning score, and they still lost by a massive 55-point margin.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this game is the ultimate proof of that offensive ceiling we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
To generate 42 scoring shots in a tabletop simulation governed by dice rolls and probability, I mean, that means you aren't just getting a few lucky rolls.
Right. It's not just luck at that point.
No, statistically, they were dominating the possession and field position parameters at an unsustainable rate. It's the equivalent of a basketball team shooting 70% from the three-point line for an entire game. Their maximum capacity, when fully operational, was just mathematically impossible to catch.
It's staggering. But, you know, in the spirit of accurate data reporting, it wasn't a flawless road trip either. They did have some heavy reality checks when the dice cooled off.
They did.
Like, they went to the MCG in round 7, and Collingwood beat them by 34 points. They went to Optus Stadium in round 9, and West Coast beat them by 36 points. So, their system wasn't totally immortal away from home.
No, it wasn't immortal. But those road wins, especially that clean sweep at Marvel Stadium and the 152-point demolition of Geelong, provided the vital mathematical buffer they need.
Buffer, right.
Yeah, think about how a venture capitalist invests. You expect a lot of your investments to fail, which represents Port dropping significant games at home and ruining their local win percentage.
Yep, the Sydney and Fremantle games.
Exactly. To offset those home losses, you need a few investments to generate massive outsized returns. Their ability to turn Marvel Stadium into a reliable point bank is what kept their season alive. It balanced the ledger and secured their playoff seed.
Okay, so we have this picture of a team that is incredibly dangerous on the road, capable of generating an absurd 42 scoring shots, but also structurally fragile at home, giving up 126 points to Sydney. It's a high-scoring, high-variance regular season. But then we hit the finals. the playoffs, and the script completely flips.
It has to flip, because playoff environments in these simulations represent a completely different statistical landscape.
How so?
While the tactical modifiers tighten up, defensive structures are mathematically prioritized by the top teams, and those massive 150-point shootout games usually just evaporate from the probability tables.
And crucially, for the finals, Port Adelaide returns to Adelaide Oval, the exact same venue where their defensive floor completely fell out during the middle of the season.
The crucible of the playoffs.
Yeah.
Back in their highly flawed fortress.
Right. So let's look at qualifying final 2. QF2 against Essendon. Now, during the regular season in round 8, Port played Essendon at Adelaide Oval and absolutely crushed them. They generated 122 points and won by 30.
A standard high-variance win for them.
Exactly. But here, in the qualifying final, it is a completely different statistical profile. It's an absolute grind. Port wins 84-77, just a 7-point margin.
And if you track the quarter-by-quarter data for that specific game, it reveals a fascinating shift in how their simulation model performed under duress.
I'm looking right at it, actually. First quarter, Port is up 22-13. But then in the second quarter, Essendon's tactical modifiers clearly kick in.
Yeah, they clamp down.
At halftime, the score is Essendon 37, Port Adelaide 32. Port is losing their home playoff game at halftime, having only scored 10 points in the second quarter.
This raises an important question. When a high-variance, high-scoring team gets dragged into a low-scoring defensive arm wrestle, and they find themselves losing at home, where we already know they have a history of collapsing, do they break entirely, or do they adapt their mathematical approach?
Well, I have to push back here for a second. We're talking about a tabletop simulation based on data, right?
Yes.
So the dice don't feel pressure or choke in the traditional human sense. So if they are scraping by and suddenly struggling to score, it has to be a tactical mismatch, right? Like Essendon must have deployed a defensive matrix that totally neutralized Port's high-risk passing.
That is a superb distinction. You are absolutely right. The simulation doesn't feel nerves. It calculates modifiers.
Okay.
Essendon applied a defensive structure that lowered the overall variance of the game. Fewer possessions, fewer clean shots. And in a low-variance game, the underdog always has a better chance to win. Port's previous strategy of simply trying to outscore everyone wasn't mathematically viable anymore. They had to win an ugly, low-possession game.
And the numbers say they adapted, but barely. Like the third quarter is incredibly tense. Port manages to push their total to 71, and Essendon finishes the third quarter on 70. It's a 1-point game going into the final term.
And Port holds on to win by 7. Now compare that statistical profile to preliminary final 2 against the Gold Coast Suns, again at Adelaide Oval.
It's the exact same story. In the regular season, round 12, Port beat Gold Coast 123-115, a high-scoring shootout where variance was off the charts.
Right.
But in the preliminary final, it's a much tighter clampdown. Port wins 121-112, a 9-point margin.
So what we're observing here is a team profile that was previously known for blowing opponents away by 40 or 50 points on the road, suddenly having to grind out single-digit victories at home just to keep their championship hopes alive.
So what does this all mean? They crush teams away, but mathematically scrape by in their home finals. Was the ghost of that 46-point Sydney loss haunting their tactical algorithms at Adelaide Oval, or is this just the brutal reality of playoff mechanics?
It is the reality of playoff mechanics, but it also demonstrates an evolution in their statistical profile.
How do you mean?
Winning ugly is a vital trait for a championship model. If your simulation's only path to victory relies on generating 42 scoring shots, you will eventually face a defensive matrix that stops you.
Right.
Clawing back from a halftime deficit against Essendon in a low-scoring, low-variance game proves that their tactical settings had developed a robustness that a 50-point blowout doesn't require. They found a way to win when the probability tables weren't perfectly aligned in their favor.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the grand final, because they've survived the home finals, they've scraped through the low-variance arm wrestles, and now, for the ultimate climax, they have to go back on the road.
Yes.
To the Gabba. To play the Brisbane Lions.
And we really need to remind the listener what the regular season data tells us about the matchup between Port Adelaide and the Brisbane Lions.
Oh, yeah. Round 11, Adelaide Oval. Brisbane beats Port by 22 points.
A very decisive mathematical victory for Brisbane.
It's the ultimate setup for a climax. I mean, it's like the ultimate revenge movie script for you listening. The villain walks into your house and beats you in Act 2. So for the climax in Act 3, you travel to their house and take the crown. The data literally writes the script for us.
It really does.
Brisbane knows their tactical modifiers can beat Port's. They've already done it, and they did it at Port's home venue. Port, meanwhile, knows their underlying profile is incredibly dangerous on the road.
Brisbane represents the very system that previously exposed Port Adelaide's defensive flaws.
Yeah.
From a data modeling perspective, this is the ultimate stress test.
So we get to the grand final at the Gabba, and after those tight, stressful, grinding starts in the home finals against Essendon and Gold Coast, Port's statistical profile just explodes. Look at this first quarter data.
It is arguably the most critical statistical quarter of their entire campaign.
End of the first quarter, Port Adelaide 30, Brisbane Lions 9.
Wow.
They come out and instantly put a 21-point gap between them and the team that demolished them earlier in the year.
Synthesize that with what we analyzed in the Essendon playoff game. Against Essendon, Port started slow. They only scored 10 points in the second quarter, finding themselves losing at halftime.
Right, they had to grind it out.
Exactly.
Oh,
The simulation adjusted. In the grand final, against a superior opponent, you cannot afford a low-variance arm wrestle. They executed a flawless opening tactical matrix, applying maximum variance immediately to build an insurmountable mathematical buffer.
And they just kept building on that buffer. Halftime score, 62-42, a 20-point lead. Third quarter, they pushed the margin out to 102-67.
Just relentless.
A 35-point lead going into the final term. The final score is 126-101, a 25-point win to mathematically secure the premiership.
It is a complete mirror image reversal of the round 11 result. In round 11, Brisbane won by 22. In the grand final, Port wins by 25.
It's poetry in a spreadsheet. It really is. It perfectly captures everything we've been unpacking today. Whether you're managing a stock portfolio, leading a business quarter, or just trying to understand how championships are built, the key takeaway is that high variance isn't a death sentence.
Definitely not.
A championship isn't a straight line of dominance. It's not just generating a perfect predictive model every single week.
Far from it. The data shows it's highly nonlinear.
It's dropping huge games at home to Sydney and Fremantle. It's finding this completely unexpected statistical fortress on the road at Marvel Stadium to act as your capital. It's generating 152 points against Geelong, but then having the structural flexibility to scrape together an 84-point come-from-behind win against Essendon when the playoffs tighten up.
Yeah.
It is a volatile mix of variance, peaking at the exact right mathematical moment when they hit the Gabba.
And, I think there's a really profound thought to pull from this data set, something for you listening to mull over even after we log off. When we look at a championship season, we always celebrate that final outcome.
Of course.
We look at the 126 points they scored in the grand final and marvel at the efficiency. But looking at the numbers across the entire simulation log, the true blueprint for this success was clearly built on the backs of their worst structural failures.
Wait, walk me through that. How does the data prove that?
Well, look at the progression of their quarter-by-quarter metrics. Without those heavy regular season losses at home to Sydney or Fremantle, exposing their defensive flaws, their algorithms wouldn't have been tested.
Oh, I see.
Without that specific loss to Brisbane in round 11, would Port Adelaide have developed the tactical resilience required to navigate those tight, low-scoring finals against Essendon? Would the simulation have known it needed to come out and completely overwhelm Brisbane 30-9 in the first quarter of the grand final?
That's a great point.
Does a system actually need to be broken during the regular season to mathematically learn how to be unbreakable at the end?
Wow. That is, yeah. If your probability matrix doesn't get exposed in round 12, maybe it catastrophically fails in the grand final. The data definitively shows they took their statistical beatings, the model adjusted its tactical weightings, they utilized their road form as a vital buffer, and they brought the entire equation together when the variables mattered most. That raw spreadsheet of numbers, it's infinitely better than the highlight reel. It is the true mathematical story of survival. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the numbers behind the glory. Until next time, keep looking past the highlights, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.